how does innovation fit into this agenda? Well, it fits into this agenda both because of the choice of technology and also around, this is the choice of a given shelf of technologies at any one point in time, and this one is around biases and technological change, the nature and direction of technological progress, which is the one I want to talk about. And it also fits into the story because it tells us both about the participation of poor in production, who is involved in production, and marginalization, which I was referring to earlier on. And a very neglected topic, which I think the economics profession is very culpable on, and I'm going to talk a great deal about, is what sorts of products and services are made available to meet the needs of different levels of income. So we have a lot on that. We tend to have not much on that, but I think it's an area of considerable importance for reasons I'll explain later. So if that's the case, how we might think about innovation and poverty, we just need to round off this first session by asking the question about the inducements to innovation. What are the factors out there which determine the direction of technological progress? And I'm referring here in the first instance to a book by Rattan, which is called, somebody remind me, The Economics of Technological Choice. It's the textbook on technological change. It's essentially on the inducements of technological change. And he talks about the nature of demand. And in a book of 476 pages, Rattan's discussion of the impact of demand on technological progress is less than 1 page. Okay. Most of the literature, the economic literature on the inducements of technological change, are on the prices of factors of production, allocating decisions. How much does capital cost? What are wages like? And in intelligent versions, what's the nature of infrastructure, which I think is an important part, although you don't find it in the text. And then the stuff which Spru knows better than anybody, or as well as anybody, which is the issue of path dependency, which is that innovators get locked with bounded rationality into doing things they know a lot about but slightly differently. And if you put those three together, and these are the things which that one, that one, and that one are discussed by Rattan. He doesn't really address that one, but it's important from the development perspective because of scale issues and reliability issues. And then you'd want to add something else, which again is in the evolutionary economics field. My colleagues at the Open University have done a lot of work on, which is the regulatory environment. And you put all those things together, and we begin to understand why it is that technology has particular directions and how that might have an impact on inequality and poverty, thinking of it both in terms of who's included in production and who benefits from production, the nature of products and the nature of process. So I want now to turn to the developing countries side of that story. Do you want to stop for a moment, Harvey, or want me to go on?
Happy to continue.
Okay. Is it fairly clear? When Howie said that this room has bad acoustics, I asked him to say that. Before I left IDS, I was there for 30-something years. I got an award for a commendation for being an innovative teacher because I'd walk around during question times. My hearing was going. The only way I could hear the audience was to walk around. So if you do want to come back at me, you have to come back at me in volume. Okay, think about a taxonomy of innovation which has two scales. It has a scale, and I'm talking now about, in the choice of techniques literature, I'm dating myself. I see some people in the room who know a lot about it. We're talking about technical inefficiency. I don't want to get into that. Factor productivities, coefficients of production. And we'll talk about labor-intensive small-scale technologies on that axis and capital and scale-intensive technologies on that axis. And the famous Sussex Manifesto said that since 98% of the world's research and development was occurring in rich countries, I'm sorry, I must be corrected by Jeff Oldham, not research and development, I think he said expenditure on science, is that right? And technology, as a proxy for research and development. Since 98% occurred in developing countries, it's not surprising that the technologies which were efficient were the capital and scale-intensive technologies for rich countries. But these poor people at the bottom here, technologies which might suit the needs of employment, labor intensity, low wages, were great and desirable, but they weren't efficient. And for many decades, that has been the reality, which is that most of the dynamic technologies which contribute to growth have been technologies which, from the perspective of developing countries, and I would say increasingly the global south in the northern hemisphere, of people in the north who marginalized from production as well. Most of this technology is available for them, have been inefficient, and therefore, this is the important point, have been diffused by non-market actors, by NGOs, by civil society organizations, by not-for-profit organizations. And given these environment, it's not surprising, therefore, that the growth in many developing countries has been of this sort. I want just to add a footnote to the point I made earlier on about the labor market not clearing. For those who know the Lewis model, which is that the modern sector will absorb the poor sector, the inefficient sector, Lewis never spoke about bias in technological change. There's an assumption in Lewis, which is, it's an assumption, an implicit assumption, that technological change is neutral. Once you start factoring labor-saving technological progress into the Lewis model, you get to a world which actually displaces labor, but I'm losing my thread. Okay, that's all then. What I want now to talk about is now. And as you know, we're in the midst of a global economic crisis, and we don't know what the outcome's going to be, in the north at any rate. Maybe. Head of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, or perhaps the Japanese story. I'm less pessimistic than the Japanese story, but I think it's not like that. It's like this. There are structural problems in the north, which I am convinced, I suppose most people now, it will take some significant period before Europe and North America will continue as sources of dynamic growth. That is not true, in my view, in China, India, Brazil, and other developing countries, where for reasons which, if you want to, we can talk about later on, they won't grow at 10% a year, but these countries will continue to grow at substantive levels. And we might find ourselves in a rather different world to the world which most of us recognize, which is the world where most of us in this room were either born or acculturated, which is that China and India together account for 7% of the global population, and normality, the drivers of growth, were the rich countries. We're moving increasingly, and you can look, this is from Angus Madison. Okay, how reliable are these figures? Forget it. But anyway, Madison calculates the year 1, year 1000, 1500, 1820. Until 1820, 50% of the world's output, or thereabouts, took place in Asia, in China and India. Just in China and India. Our view of what's normality, of what the drivers of innovation and demand are, is really a view dominated by a very short period of history, when Asia was on its knees and the dynamic economies of the world were Europe and North America. Already, China and India account for more than 15% of global output. This is a dated figure. Madison died, what, 3 years ago? And I think if you add the crisis into this, robust growth in China, you will see that the projections for 2030 are significant. Not significant is the wrong word. At least going to be 35–40% of the world economy. Now, my point is that I think that this is a period of disruption. When the world economy is no longer going to be driven by people from Europe and North America, it's going to be driven by Asian countries. Well, so what? Is there something genetic about Asian people which is different? Are they intrinsically different? No. But the point is that the structure of these economies, which are now driving the world, is a structure where the world is being pulled along not by high-income economies growing rapidly, but being pulled along by low and middle-income countries. And I've just finished a book which Howie referred to earlier on, which is what's happened to global commodity prices as a consequence of China's economic growth. And the argument in the book, which I've written for an ex-student of mine, is that the nature of demand in middle-income countries like China, India, and Brazil is by its nature commodity intensive. So that the commodity price boom is not going to go away. It's going to be with us for that and a series of reasons on the supply side for some decades to come. It's not because Chinese people eat cement or steel or manganese, but it's because urbanization, particularly urbanization and infrastructure, is incredibly demanding of commodities. So when the world economy is pulled along by low and middle income countries, the structure of demand, and I'll show you some figures later on, and the context in which innovation occurring is structurally different to the north. And I'm going to try and evolve the discussion to suggest that that will lead us into a different trajectory of innovation, which has quite significant implications for poverty and inequality. Can I go on, Howie? Or any questions? Okay. First part of the story is we understand the determinant, we understand inequality and poverty, we understand the determinants of innovation. We're in a period of disruption where dynamism is now low and middle income countries, not high income countries. Might we expect, this is where I'm moving now, this to affect the pattern of innovation? I'm going to talk about 4 forces of disruption in the innovation sphere out there which lead me to believe that we're moving into a world of a structurally different pattern of innovation. Not all innovation, but certainly a body of innovation which might be much more appropriate for the problems of poverty and inequality. Okay, first one, the character of low-income markets. How many people in this room have been to China? It's impressive, isn't it? Every time I've been to China, I think 5 times. Each time I go, there's a new ring road around Beijing. My Chinese colleagues have tastes which are even more brand conscious. I'm hardly brand. Even more brand conscious than my daughter. Okay. Some of you may understand that. But there are 150, 200 million people in China. If you look at the average household income, I'm not talking about personal income, household income in China, 2004, 2009, number of households, you can see that indeed there's been a situation in which the average household income